Well, hello and welcome. Thanks for joining this week's panel conversation. My name is Matt Fulton, and I'm the Vice President for National Engagement for an engagement company called Polco. We help communities with performance issues, tracking performance, and building stronger engagement in the community. And we've been putting on these panel conversations really to get the perspectives of local government leaders on how they are going about building engagement in their communities and integrating resident input into the things that they do in their roles. The whole purpose behind these conversations is really simply to help you gather a new perspective, a new idea, something that you might be able to use in your communities. And I'm really happy about the panelists that we're going to have in our conversation today. I'd like to introduce the format for today. We'll do a quick introduction of the panelists, and then we'll get into the questions that we'll be asking them. It takes generally about an hour. I think it'll probably be a little bit shorter today since we only have two panelists. But again, the whole intent is really to gather perspectives from these local government leaders and benefit from what they're doing in their communities. So let me go ahead and start introducing our panelists. Our first panelist is Michael Martinez, who started in the city of Sunland Park, New Mexico last year after a decade and a half in leadership roles in Texas. Michael prides himself as a data-driven and results-oriented manager and with demonstrated results, especially in the areas of process improvement and organizational change. Michael has a master's of public administration from the University of North Texas and an MBA from the University of Texas in El Paso. Both of our panelists are going on beyond their master's degrees and are working on their doctorates. Michael's working on his doctorate in organizational change from Baylor University. It's always nice to be talking to managers who are also very engaged in their community. And Michael sits on several important boards, including the El Paso Ronald McDonald House, Leadership El Paso Curriculum Committee, the UTEP Alumni Association Board of Directors, and the El Paso Police Foundation Board of Directors. Michael, thank you for joining us, and I would really just welcome you to add a little bit more to your background, if you wouldn't mind.
No, you covered a lot of it, but I'm glad to be here. While I'm a Texas resident, I'm now in New Mexico, and it's been an amazing change. Definitely focused on trying to make sure that we give the best result back to the residents here in Sunland Park. But most of the bio was covered except for the family part. And just wanted to mention, I think family is important as a manager. You have to have a family work-life balance. So I get to be a baseball coach, dad, and teacher at home too. So.
Thank you. I'm glad you added that part in. I appreciate that. Let me introduce our second panelist. Ronnie Guest was selected in 2019 by the City Council in Carrizo Springs to be its city manager. Although Ronnie has extensive involvement working in the city of San Antonio in his career path, as well as spending a little bit of time working for a utility organization. Ronnie has a MBA and is also completing his doctorate in organizational leadership. Mr. Guest is an active participant in ICMA, the Texas City Management Association, the American Association for Blacks in Energy, and a member of the National Forum for Black Public Administrators. So he's very involved and committed to his profession and his community. I also want to mention that has served as president of the Urban Management Association of South Texas in San Antonio. So Ronnie, I would welcome you to add a little bit more and really appreciate you taking time to be with us today.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate that. And you covered quite a bit with that. But I also like to say, kind of like Michael, the community is extremely important. And for me, just my passion of serving and leading with that servant leadership model first, while always putting people first. The only thing that's not added, it was my family. My wife of almost 27 years now. We have two grown children. My daughter's 25 and my son will be 23 here in July. And then we have two granddaughters, one that'll be 3 and one that's 6 months. And for me, that's the joy of my life. is especially the grandkids. And everything I do in the community is great in trying to improve the quality of life of everybody that we serve. And my wife has been my rock for me to be supportive, because in city manager life, there's times where you don't have a lot of stuff at home that you really got to have somebody that really supports you. And she has been a true blessing for me. But I love serving the communities and everything that we do, from my team here. And from day one, I let my team know I would never refer to them as employee. They would always be a team member, because we're all one team. We have different roles, and not one role is any more important than the other. As long as we're pushing in the right direction, we're going to solve and address the concerns of our community as a whole. So, I'll win with that.
That's great. Thanks. And, given the year that you guys have just gone through, having that family balance is such an important part of it. So thanks to both of you for taking a little bit of your time to share your perspectives. So the conversation today is around the value of community engagement under the American Rescue Plan Act. We have just endured a very disrupted year, impacting every aspect of the community life and just the way that people have interacted and have been able to just kind of manage their personal and professional responsibilities in a meaningful way. And these challenges that have forced such huge change and challenges to communities really presents a variety of just barriers and issues that you need to contend with. And one of those that we're focusing in on is the challenges around engagement and helping residents feel like they're connected. Now we're kind of entering this new phase where you've got the American Rescue Plan getting into place. And so part of it is to just really get a better understanding as to how you're integrating your planning around that ARPA Act and how you're incorporating your residents in that process. Engagement has always been difficult. I think that our research shows that 80% of U.S. adults have not even ever attended a city council meeting. And so there's a lot of reasons for that. But our research from the National Research Center has got all sorts of longitudinal data over the last couple of decades that really shows the level of engagement. And one of the things that was noticed during this last year is that there's an increase in the level of trust in local government based on how local government has handled the pandemic and related issues. But there is a little bit of a decrease in terms of their confidence around communities' ability to be prepared for emergencies. And I think that's a little bit of a bellwether that kind of talks to the importance of having people engaged enough in the things that are going on in a community, enough so that they have a context and appreciation for the value of the services that local government is providing. And so given these shifts and given the just overall importance of building engagement in the community so that people feel like they're part of it and that their voices are being heard, the interest that we're really trying to tackle today is how are you going about meeting those responsibilities that communities have? And so there's really three questions that I want to pose to each of you. The first is, how are you identifying community needs and priorities? The second is, how does that input help you in the delivery of the services that you provide in the community? And then finally, what strategies and tools are you finding successful that others can benefit from as you start tackling these really significant challenges? So, Michael, if you don't mind, let's start with you with the first question. Can you talk about how Sunland Park is identifying community needs and priorities to be addressed using the American Rescue Plan resources?
Sure. So in general, just a little bit of background about the community. The community itself is a lower socioeconomic community in nature. Our average age is about 29 years old, but we're a community that kind of puts people in the wrong interpretation. We're either a very young community or a very old community. And so we have a lot of seniors. So most people would say, hey, just jump on social media and engage with your community that way, which is a lot of what we do. We engage with social media, whether it's Facebook, whether it's LinkedIn, whether it's Instagram, whether it's Twitter. A lot of those things are items, social posts that we use to notify the public of items related to programs that the government has rolled out, whether it's federal funds that are being passed through at the state level. For example, the Restaurant Reimbursement Act, or the Local Business Shutterman Act, or even to the point of getting down to general ARP program funding, hopefully that we'll receive by May 11th, that we can utilize for local businesses and for residents related to anything from rent or things of that nature. We try and put that on social media, but we're also faltering. We recognize that we have a much older generation that we need to get involved with. We've engaged our city council members now to do community letters for their districts. And so we're putting those both in English and in Spanish. I have a very large predominant population, about 65 to 70% that speaks Spanish, and that needs to see that information in two languages. And so we're running those types of newsletters, so to speak, in between our council districts, and having to put that information there, which in general was kind of a surprise for us because we're all leaving that kind of print format. But it's having to get back and making sure that we're engaging all of the community members, not just those on social media. And so between those two pieces, we're really focusing on that.
Have you developed a plan for the use of your ARPA resources? Or are you still in the process of engaging and doing your needs assessment?
So we've identified a couple of different areas. We recognized, and we're kind of, because of our location, we're on the border between Mexico, Texas, and New Mexico. We're at the very southern tip. And so we're ultimately a bedroom community for the city of El Paso, Texas. But what's interesting about us is that we have a lot of business owners that live in Texas that own businesses in New Mexico. About 50% of our business owners didn't qualify for federal funds that were passed down through the state for any of that reimbursement because you had to live within the state. And that was kind of a restriction the state placed on the funds. So we were trying to work with the state to say, hey, do you guys realize how this is impacting us? Because of that, we knew the total amount of businesses and the community that was impacted early on when we first got our first round of funds. And so this program was basically created to assist those residents and those business holders and business owners that didn't get funding previously in any of the other CARE Act reimbursement programs. So we're addressing it from losses to possible reimbursements on possible revenues that were created this year. And they have to show us that from previous 3-year previous approach. So we're using data to make sure that we can reimburse those individuals on a fair basis.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, thank you. Ronnie, can you share how Carrizo Springs is identifying community needs and priorities to be addressed using the ARPA funds?
Yeah, first and foremost, just to kind of rewind back a little bit, when I first got here, City of Carrizo Springs, one of the things I did is I created a forum, which we called the Coffee with the City Manager, before COVID really started taking off, and then we couldn't hold those meetings. The purpose of that was to have the department directors and representatives from each of our departments there to listen to the community, to hear their voice and what they wanted to see, in their local government. And so taking some of that information is what we will be looking at and what we are looking at to move forward, because now we have really a roadmap. We didn't know this was going to happen when we were having those meetings. We were just really trying to look at the better way to serve our community and what services that they were looking for. But in essence, it's become really a roadmap and information to kind of help us when these funds start to hit as to areas that we can now be able to fund and target to address the community needs. And like Michael said, our community is, from the social economic standpoint, it's very low. We have a large population of elderly, and I would say even upwards of 75% predominantly Spanish speaking in our community, because we're kind of nestled right here between Eagle Pass and Laredo, a little further down and down south. And so it's an extreme challenge. And so for us, as we're looking at it, some of the things that, my team has been talking about is once these funds start to happen and hit us, so we know we can start to put things in place, is to see how we can best navigate and impact our residents, because we know that a lot of residents lost jobs, and there was very few jobs here to begin with. And a lot of our, as we're looking in our community, a lot of our restaurants and small mom and pop businesses, they didn't survive. And so you see a lot of empty storefronts at this point. And so, our team's challenge is to figure out how best we can help not only our residents, try to recover those that lost jobs. We do regular food distributions. We want to continue to ramp that up to provide just the essential services that people need, but then also look at how can we impact them from the utility standpoint, because many of them haven't been able to pay whether it's their electric or their water. And one of the things that I instructed my team is we weren't going to disconnect anybody and turn off water for quite some time, because, from the inability to pay, we definitely understand what's going on in our community. So that is one of the things that our team is first and foremost going to look at, is from a utility standpoint, how can we get some additional money in addition to the stimulus money that, residents got into their hands to kind of help them with the additional bills, rent payments, all of those things. And then also look at our local businesses to see how we can help them recover. One prime business is a locally owned gym. And we know that it's the only gym in our community, but that was one of the first businesses to close and one of the last businesses to open, is your gyms. And it's really unfortunate that they're the only one. And when you're that small, it doesn't, and a lot of the residents, as soon as they couldn't go to the gym, they canceled their membership. So there was still no revenue going into the gym whatsoever. I talked to the gym owner and I said, even though I can't go, just keep taking out whatever I had for my wife and I every month. Just even if it helps a little bit with your utilities, it's still a little bit of something. And so when these funds come, that's going to be the areas that we're going to be targeting first, is first and foremost trying to get our residents above water, because right now, many of them are extremely struggling. And so we partnered with an agency or a church out of Crystal City. For the last 7 or 8 weeks, we've been providing food distribution every Tuesday evening, which is meats, potatoes, veggies, eggs, milk, water, all those things, and not having an income requirement. Just show up, pick up, and we'll see you again next Tuesday. And so this is another thing that we can help some of those agencies as well, some of those nonprofits, that they can continue, because a lot of those nonprofits aren't getting the same level of donations that they normally would have gotten from the residents. And so their revenues are going to be down, and being a nonprofit, they don't have too many ways that they can generate funds. And so those are the areas that we're going to be focusing on when these funds do happen and hit our banks. And so our team has already begun working out a plan so that when it happens, we don't have to start working on the plan. We already got the plan in place. We can just start making things happen in our community.
Yeah, and I like the way that you have, it sounds like you really used a lot of the community partners. And there's a lot of those engaged networks of organizations and people who are there ready to help those people in need.
Absolutely.
So absolutely, I totally appreciate that. Ronnie, let's jump into the second question. And would you mind just talking about how resident input helps guide the delivery of services in your community?
Like I said, with the city manager, the coffee with the city manager, that is important. That having their voices heard from the very beginning, and in this community over the last 4 years or so, 4 or 5 years, they had, I think, 6 or 7 different city managers. That's a lot of turnover. And part of it, who knows why? Won't get into that, but who knows why? But at the end of the day, when I came on board, I wanted to make sure that all of our residents had their voices heard. And so we use our social media the best that we can. But here again, we have a high population of elderly in our community. So we also put information in the regular newspaper, or the local newspaper called our Haviland. We want to make sure that those that don't have connectivity to social media, that they have the ability to also reach out to us in other ways as well. And so that's how we're looking at, delivering the different services, is basically based on the feedback that we had already got from our residents, and then also continuing to seek out additional information, whether it's working through the council when they're talking to their constituents to say, hey, what are you hearing? Let me know what you're hearing. And then we can start to put that plan together to make sure that we're delivering the services that that they need as a whole. And so to me, that's the important process that needs to happen, especially in a smaller community. Everybody knows everybody. But then most people don't want to say, I need help, but this is what I do need. And so we want to make sure that each of those folks' voice is heard. I get out and about, as I'm out, I'm never disconnected from our residents. And I like to also keep an open door policy, and they know that. If I don't have a meeting and I'm just in my office working on things, and a resident comes to City Hall, I'm going to make time to meet with them. For me, that's extremely important. I've been told that just never happened in the past, that they had to have a meeting and it could be 2 weeks out before. I was like, no, If I'm here in my office and I don't have anybody else sitting at my desk, behind my desk, and we're working on things, come in, let's talk about whatever it is that you need. And so I think that's the best way to continue to provide the services, is listening to see what they really want and what is needed.
Yeah. Did you notice during the pandemic any shifts in the number of people that participated in local issues or local activities?
I didn't see a number that shifted. They changed the methods by which they would reach out. Before, they would stop by City Hall, and then I started getting more calls and more emails. And before, they would just stop by. And so the message kept coming, but it was just in different waves and different styles that they were delivering those messages to us.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Michael, can you talk about how resident input helps guide the delivery of services in your community?
Yeah, no, I think much like Ronnie, I unfortunately, I started in August of last year. So we were right at the height of the pandemic. El Paso was actually just becoming a hotspot for the country. What wasn't familiar is that because we were a bedroom community, we really weren't getting people recorded. They were going to go test in El Paso. And so we were missing a lot of that. People didn't get it. And being a hotspot ourselves, there was almost no communication. The public was almost shut off completely from government. And so it wasn't until maybe about September or October that people started calling the offices again, calling, even knowing, because we've been working from home for the majority. Actually, Sunland Park is probably one of the only cities that's working at City Hall right now, where the rest of New Mexico is still working from home for a large part. And so the lucky part is that we just went green or turquoise, where we open up to about 75%. Texas has been open for a while now. And so it's interesting to see that dynamic, because you have some people that want to come in on a daily basis, like they used to City Hall and say, hey, this is our concern. But much like Ronnie mentioned, I think the group just changed how they started engaging. More phone calls, more emails. I started putting my cell phone number, because we are such a small community. I started putting my cell phone number on my card and on the website, so that if people needed anything, they could call directly. And yes, it has shaped it specifically. I get calls or emails at 5, 6 in the morning from people that work very early shifts, and then at 11, 12, 1 at night. And yes, we respond to those in the morning or in the evening. But it does, it helped generate this idea of what are the needs. So much so that we had to create a tracking system. Ronnie mentioned it. I feel like we need to talk to each other more, Ronnie, because we have a lot of the same issues. People never walked in. It's the same way. I have an open door policy. People said that was non-existent. Residents would never get to talk to the city manager, which in my mind is backwards. You should be able to go to the top if you need it. But all of my directors should have that same piece. And so I've encouraged all of them to have that same policy. If someone comes to them, don't push back. Ask why they're asking you those questions, right? There's a reason why they're coming to you. And so it does formulate that. It's helped us kind of regroup. We recently had a strategic planning session where we had a lot of the community engage. It was digitally, but they came in and started asking questions. Why are we doing this? Why aren't we going this direction? Why are we looking at this? And I was quite surprised with the engagement, especially because of the socioeconomic stereotype that exists within the community. But at the end of the day, everyone loves the community they're in, and they all want something better, not just for themselves, but ultimately for their kids. And so I think that became very aware to us in government. And you can't have a generic approach to government. It really is tailoring your service delivery to the needs of the community, and that's what we're learning, and that's what we're doing with the input that we get from the residents now.
Yeah, Michael, I know you're relatively new in the community, but did you get any observations from the city council or other staff about the levels of participation in your strategic planning process?
We did. So they hadn't really, and just to kind of some background, I actually can see my parents' backyard from here. But I lived in Texas, literally on the Texas line. If I crossed the street from my parents' house, I was in New Mexico. And so it was always interesting. But one of the things that we noticed, and one of the things council said, is people want change. They just haven't been able to express it. And so one of the things that we did is we wanted to make sure that we engaged on the strategic planning piece. We encouraged our council members to get feedback so that when they walked in, they had to answer some tough questions. What direction do you want to go? And what did the people tell you about where they want to go? How do you bring back that input and implement it into this process? And so they very much said, because we had some poor gathering of information early on, they wanted to do that on their own. And so we empowered them to do that, and they brought that back to the process. So it was positive.
Yeah, that's great. I love the way that you phrase that too, that people want to change. They just need to know how to do it and how to engage themselves. And that's kind of what the purpose of these conversations is all about. And as well as sharing ideas with other local government leaders that are running into the same exact issues. And so I'm glad I've got both you and Ronnie on the panel today. And maybe we've created a new relationship.
I'm taking down his email, so.
Let's switch over to the third question. And Michael, I'll start with you. Can you talk about the strategies and tools that you're finding successful for helping to engage residents and track, and specifically around tracking your performance?
Sure. So one of the key pieces I think that's important to mention is that there wasn't any tools to track performance in general. I'm very transparent. I want to be very transparent. I think some of the history of Sunland Park was legal issues and transparency issues. There was a lot of that existed. Investigations, the state had to come in. And so the first thing that I wanted to do is get buy-in. And I wanted to make sure that everyone knew that the buck stopped with me. If something went wrong internally with my team, we have conversations, but at the end of the day, I'm ultimately responsible. And that was what I wanted to make sure not only council knew, but the community knew. And so I told them, I said, part of that is the open door policy. Please hold me accountable and walk in. If you think something is wrong, you have the power to come in and ask me as a resident. But on top of that, we started creating performance management measures within our departments. Our budgets were all over the place. Performance management was all over the place. And so we ultimately streamlined using the budget as the primary tool to create a performance management budget system. In doing so, we were able to create performance measures and metrics within that. So for an example, for streets, we had tons of potholes all over the place that were never getting filled. And so I said, hey, why don't we just create a service level agreement with ourselves to say potholes have to be filled within X amount of time, right? And then if you get someone to request it, or if they're calling, how can we document that so that, we can say, okay, John Doe, who lives on X street, you called on this date, and we can get out there and provide this level of service for you. You can have an expectation of receiving this service within 1 and 5 days. And so I think creating service level agreements within our organization, I think creating processes in some cases that never existed, that's a tool. Creating those items help develop that approach to metrics and being used in performance management. And so I think those have been key things. But ultimately, it was the budget that allowed us to do that, because we had to make sure that we, especially with COVID, we had to make sure that we were aligning ourselves and streamlining the money that we had so that we weren't killing ourselves on the back end.
Is your strategic planning process, does that incorporate a set of performance metrics goals for you to achieve over the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, it did. And so ultimately, not only did it spell out where we want to go, but it spelled out how we had to get there. And so everything from, and even the bad words, right, for council members. Do we need tax increases? If we're not going to increase taxes, how do we get the revenue to pay for the service level that you all are committing to? So we have to answer the hard questions and the tough questions, but we have to make sure that we're also translating those metrics to the community. And what does that mean for them? So asking the community, yes, you want 10 more firefighters, but what does that actually mean? And what are you willing to commit to? And then are we doing our job now so that you think the 10 firefighters will help, but is that really going to transpire once we get them, right? And so I think that really conveys a message when told correctly to the community, and it does help the messaging piece a little bit.
Yeah, and of course the pandemic and all of the other issues that are impacting the southern part of the states has a big impact on strategic plans. And so you always need to be adaptive and paying attention to what are the current needs that residents have as opposed to what they needed 2 years ago, right?
Of course. Well, and a good point of that is trash pickup, right? Our trash pickup is almost tripled because people are staying home during the pandemic, and people are having to respond to that. And that's exactly an example of how we have to do that. So, but yeah, we definitely have to be accommodating.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Ronnie, can you talk about the strategies and tools that you're using for helping to engage residents around your performance, your community's performance?
Absolutely. Very, very much like Michael, when I got here, one of the first things I asked for is, I said, I want to see our strategic plan. I said, I wanted to see our budget book, and I wanted to have a very good idea of what performance measures that we had in place. And then I was advised, we don't have a strategic plan. I was like, they didn't print a budget book. And I'm like, what do you mean you don't have a budget book? And they says, we haven't had performance indicators at all. And I'm like, then how do you know how well you're doing with anything that you're doing within the community? And so first and foremost was to, reach back and say, okay, we have to start to look at what are going to be our key performance indicators. And like you mentioned, it's tied to the budget at the end of the day. You got to go back, you got to look. And for us, coming from the city of San Antonio and everything that I spent there and working in the manager's office, one of my first projects that I worked on was to revamp the city's performance measures to make sure that they actually tell your story of what your community is doing, what your city is doing for your community. And so for me, that was the process that I had to start because they didn't have it. And so we had no way of telling our residents what we did, how long it took to pick up a dead animal out of the street in a small community, when they said, well, there's been you got a lot of deer here. There's been a deer that's been sitting in this area for 5 days. And I'm like, okay, this community is small enough. You could walk over there and get him before, the animal care officer going over to pick him up or whatever. And so to start to do that, we needed to better have a means to tell our story. And so my team members, they were like, oh boy, this is going to be tough. And so I created a leadership team that, again, they didn't have before. And so our leadership team, we meet monthly to talk about these types of things because I wanted them to understand, yes, I could go and I could create all the performance indicators. I could do that. But I want them to understand why and how this process is done. Because in this line, you turn around and one day you got a new one. And so I want them to understand how they were going to do that process. And so we started, I won't say started now, we started back then looking at department by department, whether it's the city clerk's office, whether it's parks and recreation, number of linear feet that we clean, how often are we out there, especially with COVID, and we want people to be out and not inside with COVID. How frequently are we cleaning with our bleach solution, all the items within the park? How long does it take us, like you said, to fill a pothole? If we get a call that there's a pothole, or if we see one, within 24 to 48 hours, that pothole should be addressed. There's no ifs, ands, buts about it. This community is small enough that we can address that. We have teams, we disperse them to do those things. And so that was critical for our team. And then I started working on the strategic plan as to looking at over the next 5 years, incrementally each year, adding some different things that we were going to be doing to ultimately get to our 5th year. And as we get mid-year, whether we're 2.5 years in, then we start reevaluating again, and you start looking at another 5 years out. And so you don't wait till you get to year 5 to say, okay, we got to year 5, now let's start another 5. No, this is one of those documents that, I wanted our team to understand that this is going to be ever changing, and when COVID happened, that really let us more so know that everything is going to be ever changing. No day is going to be typical. And so for me, that was the important thing that I had to share and make sure that all of those service level agreements based on those KPIs, that we're sticking to those things. And that's how we begin to tell our story of what we do, how we do, and how we relate that to our residents. Because if you can't tell them how long it takes to pick up an animal off the street, or how long it takes to fill a pothole, or how many feet of parks that you've cleaned, or how many streets that you've paved, if you can't provide that data, then you're not doing them a service. You're just here for the sake of being here, and we have no means of being able to tell what we've done or how we've accomplished anything, or the number of stray dog calls, number of bite calls, all of these things and where they came from. And so when we start looking at these measures, and then we start, for me, I take my military, and you look at a shot group, for example, say calls for service as it relates to stray or bites. We can take a shot group and we can look and say, okay, we got a high concentration of stray and bite calls in this area. Now that tells us, based on that data, that we've got issues as it relates to responsibility as responsible pet owners. Okay, so now we can have our animal care in that area, and we can also provide education in that area. Now we're going to provide education across the city, but we're going to target those areas based on the number of calls for service that we get. And the same way would be for potholes, flooding, any of those number issues is starting to really track this data. And you have to be at some level data driven. And this is something that we didn't have before. The communities never had this. And so I think I kind of shook the tree, and they were like, oh my God, what's going on? But I wanted them to understand this is how you begin to let your residents know that you care and you address the concerns that they have. Otherwise, you're just in this proverbial, for better or worse, hamster on a wheel going round and round and round and not really getting anywhere. And so that's the process that I've taken here with my team and our leadership team. It's fantastic. And it was culture shock in the beginning. It really was, so they were like, oh my God, what's going on? But those are the things that you need to address. And that's how we've been able to do that. And as such, that's helped to build our strategy and how we start looking at areas of improvement within our community. And so as we talk about that, we know when we start to get these other funds and things that we can do, we have areas that we can start to target in our community based on what we've seen. And then our community can start to see real change in the community and not just the status quo that they've always seen. They pick up my trash. Eventually they pick up the animal in the street. Eventually they get this dog that's been strayed, terrorizing my community without any real data tied to it to say when it happens. We've just seen that. And so it's been extremely challenging because it's been a culture change. When you come to a community that's never been associated with those type of metrics, to now start putting those metrics in place, it can tax the team, but also the community starts to see, okay, what's going on here? But you have to be able to do that so that you can make sure that you're being successful in engaging those residents. And that's how you get to that point.
Yep. Thank you. This has been a really good conversation. It's the dynamics in a small community, and what rings true to me is really the leadership that you guys have both provided to your communities in this kind of weird time that you're confronting. I mean, my sense is that both of your communities have got pretty good ideas as to where your ARPA funds are going to be channeled, although there's still some needs planning assessments that are going to be taking place, and you've got some strategies in place for engaging with your residents. And in a small community, those personal connections seem to be kind of the dominant ways that you're connecting with your residents and just directly with your leadership and the connections into your office as leaders of your community, which I think is really, really cool. And the open door policy is really presents the community in a really positive way in my mind as a former city manager. So congratulations on that. And I think both of you really embrace the notion of the importance of engagement, particularly now as everything is so disrupted. The value of getting residents' perspective on the things that are impacting them and the things that are impacting your community. It's just so critical to be paying attention to what currently is existing and what the current priorities and needs are. And then to roll them into an adaptive strategic planning process is such a critical piece. And fortunately now both of your communities are going to have the benefit of some of these ARPA funds for helping you to deal with some of the huge challenges that your communities are facing. So thanks for your comments and your perspectives. I think that there'll be a lot of local government leaders that'll be very appreciative of hearing that. Thanks a lot for spending the time with me. I'll kind of wrap this up and just see if you have any final comments, but I will stay in contact with you. We do these panel conversations every week, and this is another great example of how we really want to just share perspectives from leaders on things that are challenging their community. So if you know of anybody who you think might serve well in on a panel, let me know, and I'll try to tie into them. You'll start seeing highlight segments of your conversations on LinkedIn probably within a week. And we want you to share these ideas with people who trust and value your opinions. And so thanks for doing that. We have found these conversations to be really very helpful for local government leaders. And so your role in participating in it has just really been very helpful. So thanks for joining today. I don't know if either of you have any kind of final comments or final thoughts that maybe you weren't able to share a little earlier?
Not really, just to thank you for the opportunity to share, our experiences and what we're doing down here in South Texas, and, then having the ability to connect with another city manager, that I might not have had the ability to connect with outside maybe a conference or something at some point, maybe ICMA, but this is a great opportunity, and there's another network that's built, from someone that you can reach out to. And so I appreciate, you putting this together, because it allows that opportunity to share with other leaders like ourselves, because we're the only ones that are in these positions. And in your community, you're the only one. There's not like you have two of them in any one community. And so it's great to be able to share this information back and forth. So I thank you for that.
Yep, you're welcome. You're welcome, and thank you. Michael, anything from you?
Yeah, no, I'm the same. I appreciate it. It's good to get to know someone else, especially that it seems to be facing the same issues, concerns. We're making the same changes. And so it's reassuring to know that you're not the only one doing the same thing, right? The only thing I would add is the small business engagement piece. If you have small business owners that are restaurant owners, they will come after you if you don't show up on Tuesdays and buy their burritos. So it's like, hey, where did you go? But I will say that. But outside of that, no, thank you very much, and I appreciate it. And Ronnie, it was a pleasure meeting you as well.
Yeah, thanks to both of you guys. The real value for me is I get to meet new local government leaders every week. And I just really enjoy that, the interactions that I've been able to have with all of you. So thanks for the work that you're doing, and best of luck with your planning and engagement and to your communities generally.
All right. Thank you, Matt. Appreciate it.
Thanks a lot. Thank you, Matt.
Take care.
Talk to you soon.
All right. Yeah, bye-bye.